The reason I'm very much in the camp of crime driving poverty, not the other way around, is because humans' natural position is a state of poverty. There was a point where Emma said something to the effect of non-violent criminals, and I actually hate this term. I hate it immensely. The idea that if you don't punch somebody in the face, you can't do significant damage is ridiculous and absurd. I would never want anything bad to happen to Bernie Madoff or anything like that because I don't want people to do vigilante justice. But
Yes.
there's a reason that he should have been wearing that bulletproof vest when he was being walked through the city of New York. I truly believe, and I've said this repeatedly, that this idea that crime is caused by poverty is a complete misread of the situation. And oftentimes, in order to get people out of poverty, the first thing you need to do is drive down the crime rate. Like, you can't, like, if everybody's stealing everything, or there's a neighborhood where there's a lot of shootings and all of that, nobody's going to want to invest in that area. If you're trying to operate a business in that area, your insurance premiums go through the roof. People, when stores are driven out of business, people who work as clerks, and these are low income jobs, but they're still jobs, end up having to lay off their staff. And there's a lot of evidence that crime is not actually driven by poverty, and it is the other way around.
Yeah, I totally say that on the show a lot, and I completely agree. I think it's being driven by people's moral intuitions. Though a lot of these people, to themselves, they believe I would only turn to crime if I was in desperate need. So that's their moral intuitions that they superimpose onto everyone else. When the truth is, a lot of people are just pieces of shit who,
Well,
commit crime because they have an opportunity to commit crime, or they
uh-huh.
commit crime to increase their status. There's a lot of different reasons people commit
There,
crime, and it's not because they're poor and needy.
so when I
Sure.
was
Yeah.
in school, there was like a pyramid of like what makes you law abiding, right? So the bottom pyramid, like the last result, is consequences and the criminal justice system as like a deterrent to commit crime. And this doesn't really work all that well because a lot of people, when they commit a crime, don't think that they're going to get caught,
Of
right?
course.
So the next layer is the social consequences, which is people who may or may not commit crime, but for the fact that they would be ostracized by their community or by their family members, end up being law abiding. And at the top of the pyramid is this idea that you believe that the law is just. Like, that is what is going to prevent you from being law abiding. When you don't think you're going to get, when you're not, when you don't believe that you would get caught if you committed the crime, or you don't believe you would face any social stigma from committing the crime, it's down to you, the individual. I believe we're eroding all of those right now with how like our culture is changing in relation to criminal justice issues.
So I have a different perspective on that. I mean, I think from at least the public policy position, I would argue is I think that in the last 20 years, particularly, I think we've seen a real defunding across the board of a wide range of social programs, right? Like social services in many communities, underfunded, scrapping for money. And I think there's been less and less institutional support across the board in America, including through churches, right? So I think that when people fall on hard times that just happen in the human condition, abuse, drug addiction, poverty, being homeless, I think we've underfunded the social part of this so much. And I think it's really left to the police to go and intervene in these situations. Cops are great at a lot of stuff. I don't think that cops have the tools to to go deal with a lot of these things like addiction, right? A cop is not going to be able to get you off drugs. So they have what tools do they have? They have jail, they have their gun, I think that we have unfairly asked cops to take on far too much in this country. And to me, the progressive way forward is for us to have more funding of our community services. And that is a more comprehensive way to address crime.
But
Mhm.
but do you agree that people, like, most crime is not committed by people who are in dire straits? That's a misread of the truth.
Well, let me interject because
Sure.
so me and you, Adam, we had a big fight about this. It's, a
Did
couple
we?
of streams ago. We
Did
did.
we look?
We did.
Come on.
And I'm
This is
trying to
great. We
be.
have Sean here now.
I
He
know,
can
and I'm
back
trying
me
to
up.
be. I'm trying to be calmer going
Mhm.
forward because I feel like I get too angry at my good friend Adam, who I love with all my heart.
Criminals are pieces of shit,
Right.
Sitch.
No, so
I don't
okay.
like.
So
I don't
my
mind
problem,
calling them
right.
pieces of shit.
My problem with the way that you were framing the conversation, and is that, and I don't know Sean's take on this, but and I'm glad he's here so we can talk about it. I would think that obviously poverty is a factor that
Right.
creates criminals and criminal circumstances. However, it
Right.
seems like some people and the people that a lot of times Sean is addressing on the left specifically say like that is like the factor. That's what causes crime, as opposed to just being, well, that's one of a multitude of factors. And when we were kind of having our disagreement, it sounded like you were saying, Adam, that you don't think it's a factor at all into creating criminal circumstances.
Well, I think it's a factor. I don't think it's the main factor, even the most prominent factor. I think most crime is committed as a crime of opportunity, even by rich people who, they feel they can steal something from work, like white collar crime and whatnot are crimes of opportunity.
Sure.
So what I would say is there is obviously a certain point in time, like if you're starving, right? Actually legitimately starving, not like American starving where you should be getting food stamps and for some reason if you're poor, you're more obese than the average person, then and you smell like bread from the bakery, right? Then you're probably going to pull like an Aladdin and try to grab that bread for yourself and, in order to feed yourself. Obviously, to a certain account this is true. But the reason I'm very much in the camp of crime driving poverty, not the other way around, is because this is how we always acted as humans before we had something called like a system of laws, like Hammurabi's code. It's the precursor to any civilization. Like you need a set of laws, a set of foundations in order to create any kind of wealth, because humans' natural position is a state of poverty. And what separates us from that is civilization, and civilization is built on law. And we've tried various different experiments on what that law should be, but as for like the overall poverty is what causes crime, just think about it. The United States has a higher crime rate than a bunch of countries that are significantly poorer than us. Like that, if crime was like a 1-to-1 like to poverty, you would expect that if you were to line up the countries by median income, you would also be able to show from the lowest to the top the highest rates of crime to the lowest rates of crime. But that is not the case. There are cultural reasons for crime and other things that clearly factor in. And again, we've actually seen even in El Salvador, even though Bukele has taken like an authoritarian stretch in locking up the criminals, that this more than any other anti-poverty program has caused investment and all kinds of things to return to the nation of El Salvador. And they, by the way, had a way higher homicide rate than us. They had a tenth of their population murdered in a tenth, sorry, of 1% of their population,
I was about to say.
Let's be clear about that. Murdered in a single year in 2015, and they had close to that in the 2 years surrounding that. So they were in a serious dire state. People were fleeing the country and all that. All of a sudden he mass locks up people with gang affiliations, and we could talk about whether or not that is okay at the scale that he's doing it. And we're looking at the potential doubling of the GDP of El Salvador after that. This is because their number
It's a
one
great
barrier
example
to growing was the fact that they had such high rates of violent crime.
Right. So, I think we're kind of talking about a little bit different things when we talk about poverty. Because, like, yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about, the person who's literally starving so they take bread. I'm more talking about the idea that, if you're growing up in a poor area, it's more likely that you're going to grow up in a situation where there's significantly lower social trust, significantly higher distrust of institutions, of government, of the system, of the idea that you can succeed in life by playing by the rules. It is significantly more likely that you're going to be living in a family situation where you might be facing abuse and all these other things. And like, it's kind of like this, like it feeds into itself because, yeah, I understand that like crime is going to make crime in the area creates more poverty, but then it's like that the environment of poverty then also can bleeds into creating more crime. And it just seems to me that it's this interplay between the two, as opposed to saying, oh, it's like a 1-for-1. Yeah, obviously it's not just a 1-for-1 situation.
Well, what I would also say is that we would see within the same populations, their crime rates parallel that. And one of the things like I always like to point to is 1950s crime rates versus 1960s crime rates. Because in the 1960s, a similar mentality, in fact, maybe even a more progressive mentality took over than we have right now. We had the war on poverty, we had
Right.
pushes for racial equality, big investments in public housing, in public health, the creation of Medicare and Medicaid. And during that period of time, you would think we would see a decline in the crime rates, but in reality, we saw the start of one of the greatest crime waves in American history that didn't cease until 1995 when
Really?
attitudes started to change. And I bring this
Yeah.
up in
Can you
the video.
substantiate that? Because that is wow. I
Well,
mean,
They
I'm
there's
not
a
I'm
Sean,
not disagreeing you. I
they
just
they
Sean,
I'd
bring
love to
up
read more about that.
Sean,
there's a
what do you
chart
think is
that they
driving that? Because I like my gut intuition is that when people have excuses that the system is unfair, they're more likely to engage in criminal activity. Like all this shoplifting that we see going on now, is that being done because people are starving, or is it being done because 90% of the stuff we see on social media is how the system is completely unfair and you're justified to shoplift? I mean, we've even covered uh, videos where they're advocating for shoplifting on YouTube.
Yeah,
Right.
because it's just a corporation or something like that. I think it's very telling to compare the COVID recession, which by the way, again, more support was paid out in unemployment. You have that $600 bonus plus your state's unemployment, plus the stimulus checks, which comparably to the unemployment were actually nothing. And but the attitude during the Great Recession, we were still in that like kind of tough on crime mentality. And this is, I referenced this briefly here. This is why people who predicted a crime increase after the housing crash, which by the way, impacted minorities significantly more, like Black people and Hispanic people had way more of their wealth tied to property. So they were ripped off way more by the housing crash. Crime actually went down. And those people who were targeted, who are considered, they're statistically like committing more crimes, their crime rates went down as well. We saw little bits of it uptick in thefts in like certain parts of the country, but nothing like we saw post COVID. Like, or which I actually liken to being post George Floyd. It's the fact that we had the same consequences both socially and societally and legally in place, and we changed them in 2020. And now, it's very profitable and there's very little downside to shoplifting. Like, you're not going to
Mhm.
face a lot of consequences in huge portions of this country. And socially, people are like, well, Walmart sucks, it's a big corporation, which, I might believe that, but like, I'm also a wealthier like YouTuber now. I'm not somebody who relies on the low prices of Walmart in order to make ends meet.
I
Yeah.
hear you. I want to jump in here because it's not, I think there's a real tendency to focus on people like in a certain group. It's not like there's not also an explosion of white collar crime going on here. I think Bitcoin is a fantastic example of this, right?
Sure.
So, here in Massachusetts, one of the ways Maura Healey, our current governor, rose to power is her district attorney's office focused immensely on white collar crime here in the Commonwealth. And I was just shooting fish in a barrel, and she's going after people every single day. This is the kind of stuff that builds, like you're talking about the pyramid of when people like commit crimes. I have no doubt that when you believe the system is rigged and there's no enforcement of it, I have no doubt that like when you have the message that you have to cheat to get ahead in America, I'd imagine that causes people to commit crime on the right, on the left, rich, poor. I think it causes that across the board. So it seems to me rebuilding public trust and going after a wide array of crime, not just someone shoplifting, a steak or something like that. And I agree that's a terrible message to be out there promoting, but I think it's not just on that end of the spectrum. I think there's just speaking frankly, I think the reason that a lot of the right wing supported Trump is I think there is a sense that he's a crook. And I think there are a lot of people that feel like they want to get away with it. No, I really mean this. I think they like that he's a crook. And I think they feel like they should get away with it too, which is when he's so recusant in breaking the law. They support that. This is not just like a poverty, inner city problem. I think it's across the board in American society.
I will say I 100% agree with you on the white collar crimes. There was a point where Emma said something to the effect of non-violent criminals, and I actually hate this term. I hate it immensely because I'm concerned about lessening the consequences for victimless crime. So possession of marijuana, there's no victim there, leave that person alone. But the idea that if you don't punch somebody in the face, you can't do significant damage is ridiculous and absurd. Bernie Madoff never punched anybody in the face.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
done more damage than any individual murderer
Right.
that has been arrested, charged, and convicted in the last 10, 15 years. Like, he ruined people's lives. He killed their retirement. Like, people who were depending on that money likely couldn't afford medical procedures when it was whisked away. Like, people took their own lives in response to it, not just his son. So like I 100% agree with you that these like white collar criminals, like, they should get severe consequences for their actions as well. Like, and I would never want anything bad to happen to Bernie Madoff or anything like that, because I don't want people to do vigilante justice. Like, I want him to be in jail for the rest of his life. So that's pretty bad, right? But
Yes.
there's a reason that he should have been wearing that bulletproof vest when he was being walked through the city of New York, because
Right.
he ruined so many people's lives. It's like, it's almost incalculable the damage that man did. So like, I do think these white collar criminals need to be regarded with the same level of disdain that we should be regarding murderers with, for sure.
Right.
If not more,
Right.
again, considering their impact.
Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.